Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. The Verity detonates like a lemon in the Abbott manse, and when the bank clears, nothing and no bone is left standing the same, because Claire's wrong is eventually revealed, and the one person no bone. Anticipated to be the cutthroat of her precisely drafted falsehoods is Harrison Abbott. What begins as an innocent moment between a child and his father spirals into a ruinous unmasking that leaves Kyle Abbott hugely shattered, his world collapsing in real time as the final nail is driven into the pall of his trust, his marriage, and his belief that he ever truly knew the woman he let into his life. Harrison, quiet but observant, becomes the doubtful idol of this explosive disclosure, fortified not with malignancy but with substantiation so ruinous, so precise, that indeed Claire's most polished denials deteriorate under its weight. It all starts when Kyle notices Harrison carrying Else, withdrawn, anxious, clinging his tablet like a lifeline, and when Kyle gently presses his son to open up, what Harrison reveals sends a bite straight through his father's chine. At first, its small effects eavesdropped exchanges, rumored phone calls, Claire's voice changing when she allowed no bone was hearkening. Harrison recalls moments that didn't make sense at the time, Claire locking doors, deleting dispatches, advising him not to tell Daddy about certain games they played that weren't really games at all but manipulations designed to turn a child against his own father. Kyle tries to brush it off, hopeless to believe there's an innocent explanation, but Harrison's eyes doen't lie, and when he hands Kyle the tablet, pulsing fritters opening a retired brochure of recordings and screenshots, the Verity hits with the force of a stranding ball. There it is, Claire's voice, cold and calculating, instructing someone on the other end of the line about how to move plutocrat, how to plant mistrustfulness, how to insulate Kyle from his family and use Harrison as influence. Kyle listens, firmed, as his woman's mask slips entirely, her words trickling with disdain not just for him, but for the Abbott heritage itself. Each alternate feels like a treason concentrated on top of another treason, and Kyle's casket tightens as consummation dawns. This wasn't manipulation born of fear or instability, this was premeditated, strategic, and cruel. Harrison watches his father's face fall piecemeal, confusion giving way to horror, horror hardening into desolation, and when Kyle eventually looks at his son, gashes rimmed with unbelief, he knows there's no going back. The woman he defended, the woman he trusted over his own instincts, has been playing them all from the veritably morning. As Kyle confronts Claire, the atmosphere turns suffocating, the walls of the manse acting to close in as her confidence falters for the first time. She tries to laugh it off, to gaslight, to charge Harrison of misreading adult exchanges, but the moment Kyle plays the recording audibly, her face rainspouts of color. The room goes silent except for Claire's own words echoing back at her, and in that moment, the precisely constructed persona shatters fully. Kyle doesn't yell, he doesn't have to. His quiet, broken unbelief is far more ruinous than rage, and when he asks her how long she planned to use his son as a pawn, Claire's silence is all the answer he needs. Harrison, standing bravely at his father's side, becomes the moral center of the room, and Kyle realizes with crushing guilt that his child saw the peril long before he did. This wasn't just treason of a marriage, this was an attack on his family, on the most sacred bond he'd left after everything he'd formerly lost. Claire eventually snaps, her countenance cracking as she switches out, criminating Kyle of being weak, predictable, hung up with heritage and pedigrees, and her words only confirm the agony. Verity, she no way loved him, she studied him. She no way watched about Harrison, she exploited him. Every gash she ever exfoliate, every pledge she ever made, was a calculated move in a long con designed to destabilize the Abbotts from the inside out. Kyle's collapse isn't dramatic, it's quiet, ruinous, and deeply mortal. He sinks into a president, hands shaking, the weight of his failure pressing down on him as he realizes he invited the adversary into his home and handed her the keys. The fallout is immediate and merciless. Jack is furious beyond words, Diane is visited by déjà vu, seeing echoes of once backstabbings repeating themselves, and the Abbott family rallies around Harrison, who's hailed not just as stalwart, but necessary in stopping commodity far worse. Because as further of Claire's scheme is uncovered, it becomes clear this wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was fiscal sabotage, commercial spying, and a deliberate attempt to fracture the Abbott conglomerate at its core. Harrison's substantiation reveals coastal accounts, burner phones, enciphered dispatches, all strictly hidden, all now exposed thanks to a child who refused to stay silent. Kyle's guilt becomes a living thing, eating at him as he grapples with the consummation that his despair for stability dazed him to every red flag signaling in his face. He remembers defending Claire to Jack, dismissing enterprises, choosing love over sense, and now those choices hang him. Claire's arrest is nippy, but her boo as she's attended out sends a nipping communication: she may be down, but she's not apologetic. Yet this time, the power dynamic has shifted. The Verity is out. Her falsehoods are ashes. And Harrison, the lowest voice in the room, was the bone who burned her conglomerate to the ground. In the fate, Kyle is forced to rebuild from the debris, not just of his marriage, but of his torn trust. He struggles to forgive himself, visited by the question of how he let this be, how he failed to cover his son. Harrison, still, shows wisdom beyond his times, reminding Kyle that speaking up was scary but staying silent would have been worse. Their bond deepens in the wreckage, forged by honesty and survival, and Kyle vows that no matter how broken he feels, he'll no way ignore his instincts or his child again. The story ripples outward, transferring shockwaves through Genoa City, with alliances shifting, adversaries inspired, and one inarguable verity settling in. Claire's reign of deception is over, and it ended not with a commercial takedown or a power play, but with a child's courage and a father's reckoning. This wasn't just the end of Claire, it was a brutal awakening for Kyle Abbott, one that bring him everything he allowed he had, but may eventually save what matters most. And as the dust settles, one thing is sorrowfully clear: Harrison didn't just expose the Verity, he changed the future of the Abbott family ever. The agony does end with Claire's arrest. It evolves, shifting into commodity far more painful and far more particular for Kyle Abbott, because once the adrenaline fades and the house grows quiet, the full magnitude of what happened crashes down on him in grim swells. In the silence of the Abbott manse, every corner feels defiled by Claire's presence, every room echoing with recollections that now feel poisoned. Kyle wanders through the house like a ghost, replaying moments he formerly cherished: late-night exchanges, rumored pledges, the way Claire smiled at Harrison, and each recollection twists into commodity grotesque now that he knows the Verity. He realizes with sickening clarity that Claire didn't just deceive him, she rewrote his reality, fitting herself into his life with surgical perfection, studying his vulnerabilities, exploiting his guilt over once failures, and using his love for his son as her most effective armament. And as Kyle eventually allows himself to feel the full weight of it, the collapse is ineluctable. He breaks not loudly, not theatrically, but in the quietest way possible, rising against the wall outside Harrison's room, gashes discovering freely as he listens to his son sleeping peacefully, ignorant that he just saved their family from total destruction. Kyle whispers justifications into the darkness, soliciting remission from a child who no way asked to be stalwart, who no way should have been placed in a position where telling the Verity meant risking the wrath of a woman he was told to trust. Harrison, meanwhile, carries his own emotional burden, one that grown-ups underrate until it eventually spills out. Though praised as an idol, he struggles with guilt, questioning whether exposing Claire will make everything worse, whether he broke his father's heart beyond form. When Kyle eventually sits him down, voice pulsing but steady with resoluteness, he tells Harrison the one thing that matters utmost: you didn't break anything. You saved us. That moment becomes the emotional anchor that keeps Kyle from drowning, because in Harrison's wide, gash-filled eyes, he sees not sweat but relief. Relief that the falsehoods are over. Relief that the secrets are gone. Relief that his pater believes him. And that trust, formerly nearly shattered, becomes the foundation upon which Kyle begins to rebuild himself piece by piece. But the mending is slow, plaintively laggardly, because as further of Claire's conduct come to light, the compass of her treason expands beyond the family and into the very heart of Abbott Chancellor. Fiscal judges uncover suspicious transfers, non-public data leaks, and strategic moves that nearly crippled the company at critical moments. Jack is mealy, condemning himself for not intermediating sooner, while Diane is consumed by a bitter sense of déjà vu, visited by the consummation that history keeps repeating itself in different disguises. And through it all, Kyle feels the eyes of Genoa City on him, aching, judging, brooding, because he wasn't just a victim, he was the doorkeeper who let the adversary outside. Claire, from behind bars, refuses to vanish still. She manipulates the narrative indeed now, feeding half-trueness to the press through anonymous sources, painting herself as Ms. New, betrayed, pushed to axes by an emotionally unapproachable hubby and an important family that no way accepted her. The captions sting, continuing injuries. Kyle is desperately trying to close, and when Harrison sees one of those papers online, confusion flashes across his face. Kyle shuts the laptop incontinently, rage burning hot in his casket, not for himself, but for his son, who deserves peace, not propaganda. That's when Kyle makes a decision that shocks everyone. He's done staying silent. In a rare public move, he steps forward, not to defend his character, but to tell the verity, his verity, Harrison's verity, and the verity Claire tried to bury. In a statement that sends shockwaves through Genoa City, Kyle confirms the extent of Claire's manipulation, makes it clear that Harrison was targeted and emotionally exploited, and draws a hard line against anyone who dares to twist the story. The response is immediate and inviting. Support cataracts in. Sympathy shifts. And for the first time since the agony began, Kyle feels like he's taken back a small piece of his power. But the damage Claire foisted can't be undone with a press release, and Kyle soon realizes that the topmost consequences aren't public, they're internal. He questions every instinct he's ever trusted, every decision he's made in the name of love, wondering how numerous times he ignored his gut because he was hysterical of being alone. Remedy becomes a lifeline, not a weakness, and in those raw, undressed sessions, Kyle confronts a painful verity. His need for control masked a deep fear of abandonment, and Claire saw it, nurtured it, weaponized it. Understanding that doesn't vindicate her, but it does give Kyle clarity. He wasn't stupid. He was mortal. And humans can be manipulated, especially when they're trying to cover what little happiness they suppose they've left. This consummation doesn't abolish the guilt, but it softens it enough for Kyle to breathe again. And as he begins to heal, he becomes further present with Harrison, further attentive, more honest. They establish new routines, morning breakfasts, late-night addresses, moments of vulnerability where Kyle admits he doesn't have all the answers. Harrison responds with a maturity that breaks Kyle's heart and heals it at the same time, reminding him that strength isn't about no way falling, it's about standing up and telling the verity, indeed when it hurts. Meanwhile, the legal mesh tightens around Claire. Harrison's substantiation proves irrefragable, and as prosecutors make their case, more victims come forward, former associates, business mates, indeed familiarity who were subtly manipulated and discarded once they outlasted their utility. A pattern emerges, one that paints Claire not as a woman driven by love or despair, but as a strategic bloodsucker, calculating every move times in advance. Kyle attends the primary hail, not out of revenge, but check, and when Claire eventually looks at him across the courtroom, there's no guilt in her eyes, only frustration that she lost. That's when Kyle knows, with absolute certainty, that walking down is the topmost discipline he can give her. She wanted control. She wanted preoccupation. She wanted to live rent-free in his mind ever. And she wouldn't. Because the final nail in Claire's pall isn't captivity, it's impertinence. She no longer matters. Her falsehoods no longer define him. Her manipulation no longer dictates his future. As Genoa City sluggishly moves on, the Abbott family begins the long process of form, and Kyle takes a step back from the chaos, prioritizing Harrison over commercial battles, emotional safety over appearances. Jack watches with quiet pride, seeing his son evolve not into the man he anticipated but into the man he demanded to come. And however scars remain, they no longer bleed. Claire's wrong is completely exposed, her heritage reduced to an exemplary tale rumored in boardrooms and family feasts likewise. But Harrison's heritage, the courage to speak up, the strength to trust his instincts, the frippery to cover his family becomes commodity far more important. And as Kyle tucks his son into bed one night, brooding that everything is eventually going to be okay, he understands the deepest verity of all. The fate stretches on like a long shadow, and just when Kyle Abbott believes the worst of it's behind him, the emotional reckoning deepens in ways he no way anticipated, because exposure doesn't incontinently equal peace, it only strips down visions and leaves raw verity behind. nights come the hardest. Kyle lies awake replaying every discussion he ever had with Claire, every moment he dismissed his own apprehension, every time Harrison dithered before speaking and Kyle was too distracted, too hopeless, too hysterical to notice. The guilt gnaws at him relentlessly, a constant memorial that wrong didn't just slip past him, it was ate in, invited to sit at his table, trusted with his child. He begins to understand that mending isn't direct. Some days he feels steady and strong, other days a single scent, a song, a familiar expression Claire formerly used sends him twisting back into wrathfulness and tone-loathing. Yet through it all, Harrison remains his anchor, the quiet strength that keeps him predicated. Harrison starts asking questions, not jejune bones, but thoughtful, searching questions about why people lie, why grown-ups make bad choices, why telling the verity can hurt so much indeed when it's the right thing. Kyle answers actually, indeed when his voice shakes, because he refuses to replace one set of falsehoods with another. He tells his son that some people choose manipulation because it gives them power, and that real power, real strength, comes from integrity, from courage, from speaking up indeed when your hands are shaking. Harrison absorbs every word, seesawing solemnly, and in that moment Kyle realizes that despite everything Claire tried to poison, his son's moral compass remained untouched. But Claire's shadow refuses to vanish still. New information shells, one last cruel twist of the cutter, that sends shockwaves through Kyle's formerly fragile sense of reality. Investigators uncover substantiation suggesting Claire had contingency plans, escape routes, backup individualities prepared long before she ever married him. It becomes horrifyingly clear that Kyle was no way her wind-up, he was a stepping gravestone. The consummation hits harder than any treason before it, because it strips down the last moping vision that what they participated was ever real. Kyle feels foolish, exposed, lowered, and the demotion is public now, deconstructed in hushed exchanges and academic captions across Genoa City. But commodity unanticipated happens as the gossip swirls. Kyle doesn't deteriorate. Rather, he grows quieter, more bent, more picky about where he places his energy. He stops trying to control the narrative and focuses on living the verity. And that quiet confidence begins to change how people see him, not as a man who was duped, but as a man who survived and chose to stand upright subsequently. The Abbott family dynamic shifts as well. Jack, visited by his own history of backstabbings, becomes fiercely defensive, determined not to let Kyle shoulder the burden alone. Diane, destroyed with guilt for not trusting her instincts sooner, makes a conscious trouble to show up not with advice or review, but with unvarying support. Family feasts come lower about business strategy and further about emotional check sways, about making sure Harrison feels safe, heard, and defended. And Harrison, seeing the shift, begins to open up more freely, participating small but telling details he formerly kept locked down, how Claire would watch him too nearly, how she'd praise him only when it suited her, how she'd subtly condemn Kyle in ways designed to plant mistrustfulness. Each disclosure hurts, but each bone also reinforces the same verity: the peril is gone. The monster has been dragged into the light, and it no longer has power over them. Also comes the moment Kyle dreads but knows he must face: the day Harrison is asked to give a formal statement. The study of his son reliving those moments fills Kyle with rage and fear, but Harrison surprises everyone with his quiet determination. He insists on telling the verity, not because anyone forces him to, but because he understands now that silence is what allows falsehoods to survive. Sitting beside his father, hands folded tightly in his stage, Harrison speaks with clarity and courage far beyond his times, relating what he heard, what he saw, how Claire made him feel. Kyle watches, heartbreaking and swelling with pride all at formerly, realizing that his son's frippery outshines his own. When it's over, Kyle pulls Harrison into a tight grasp, brooding that he no way has to be that strong again, that from now on, it's his father's job to cover him. Harrison leverages back just as tightly, and for the first time in months, Kyle feels commodity close to peace settle in his casket. Claire's case moves near to trial, and with each development, her influence shrinks. Former abettors part themselves. The mystique around her evaporates, replaced by a clear-eyed understanding of who she really is. And yet, indeed as justice looms, Kyle realizes that check wouldn't come from a verdict. It comes from choice, from deciding who he'll be after the wreckage. He turns down openings that formerly would have consumed him, prioritizes remedy sessions over board meetings, bedtime stories over late-night strategy calls. Genoa City notices the change. So does Harrison. And one evening, as they sit together under the stars, Harrison asks a question that stops Kyle cold. Do you suppose bad effects be so we can come more? Kyle does end answer right down. He thinks about Claire, about treason, about pain, about survival. And also he says the verity, that occasionally bad effects be because people make cruel choices, but what matters is what we do subsequently. Harrison smiles vocally, satisfied, and leans against his father's shoulder. As the final nail is driven into Claire's pall, not just fairly, but emotionally, Kyle understands commodity profound. Her wrong didn't just get exposed, it failed. It failed to destroy his relationship with his son. It failed to break the Abbott family. It failed to turn him into someone bitter and closed out.